Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Kid in Life channel.
Well, good morning from cold state of Mississippi. It's another winter day, 36 degrees outside. I hope everyone is staying warm and safe. We're going to get back into The Good Life. The title of the book is a New York Times bestseller written by Robert Waldinger and Marc Schulz. Yesterday, we had got to page 57 on chapter 3. Chapter 3 is titled Relationships on the Winding Road of Life.
Today we will start page number 57.
Your own mini Harvard study. If you've ever seen a picture of your mother or father as a young adult, you know how startling it can be. They seem like people we might have met along the road rather than the parents who created us. They often appear less burdened, more carefree, and somehow different. Pictures of ourselves at a younger age can be even more startling. We might look at our younger selves and feel a sweet nostalgia or maybe a sense of wistfulness as we're confronted with our physical changes, our abandoned dreams, our once treasured beliefs. For others, like Wes, looking back at a younger age reminds one of sorrow and challenges that are difficult to revisit. These impressions point to areas of our lives that are important to us, and they can be turned into something helpful using a simple, powerful exercise we developed for our Lifespan Research Foundation. And then they have a website, www.lifespanresearch.org. This involves a bit of personal research, but if you're game, come play along. Find a photograph of yourself when you were about half as old as you are now. If you're under 35, go back to the time when you were starting adult life. Really, any photo from when you were a lot younger will do. Don't just imagine that time. Try to find an actual photo. The lively reality of a photograph, the details of the place and time, the expression on your face, all help evoke feelings that make this exercise worthwhile. Now take a close look at yourself in the photograph. After you stop wondering why you were so into brown clothes or marveling at your weight or your once luxurious hair, try to find yourself back in the moment when the picture was taken. Really look. Spend several minutes, a long time, just taking it in and remembering that era of your life. What were you thinking about back then? What were you worried about? What were you hopeful about? What were your plans? Who were you spending time with? What was the most important to you? And perhaps the most difficult question to face when you think of yourself at that time, what do you regret? It helps put your answers to these questions into words. Jot down a few notes, be as detailed as you like. If you have someone close to you who's curious about this book you're reading, consider asking them to find a photograph of themselves and to do this with you. As longitudinal researchers, we suggest that if you have a printed photograph, consider using it as a bookmark. And when you're finished, leaving it here in this book along with your notes. Someone you know might get something out of it in the future as they try the exercise themselves. The records of our loved one past and thoughts are rare and valuable. The photograph of a younger self
Uh-huh.
that sort of provokes your memories. And you try and think about what you were thinking about back then at that age. After you finish this book, you put that photograph, those questions, and the answers in this book. And someone, maybe our daughter or our son or grandkids, might read this book, see the photograph, see the questions and answers, and they in turn will do the same thing. So it's like our own family Harvard research.
Okay.
I wish I had asked my parents these questions. So they're saying you can sort of do this and set it up so someone later can see what you have gone through. In the footsteps of history and beyond, the Harvard study is by no means the first effort to extract useful data from lifetimes of human experiences. For millennia, people have been trying to unlock the secrets of human life by looking at its patterns, and they have analyzed these patterns in all kinds of ways, often by categorizing them into stages. The Greeks had various versions of life stages. Aristotle described three: hypocrisy or Hippocrates, seven. By the time Shakespeare wrote about the seven ages of man in his famous All the World's a Stage, in As You Like It, the idea of life happening in stages was likely familiar to his audience. Shakespeare himself probably learned them in a grammar school. Islamic teaching also mentions seven stages of existence. Buddha teachings illustrate the 10 stages along the path to enlightenment using the metaphor of ox herding. Hinduism identifies four stages of life, or ashramas, and these echo many modern psychological life stage theories. The student, who learns about the world; the householder, who develops a calling and takes care of his or her family; the retiree, who retreats from family life; and the ascetic, who commits to pursuit of greater spirituality. Science has its own perspectives on the biological and physiological development of human beings. But for a very long time, science focused almost entirely on early childhood development. Until recently, psychological books had only short sections on the development of adults. Once someone reached adulthood, the thinking went, that person was fully formed. The only important change was that of decline, both physical and mental. In the 1960s and 70s, this perspective began to change. George Vaillant, the director of the Harvard study from 1972 to 2004, was one of many scientists who began to see adulthood as a period of important flux and opportunity. It's hard to look at the Harvard study's longitudinal data and come to any other conclusion. There were also new discoveries about the plasticity of the human brain, showing that decreased brain volume and declining brain functions are not the only changes adults experience with age. Positive changes also unfold throughout the lifespan. In short, the most important recent science shows that no matter where you are at in your life, you are changing, and not just for the worse. Positive change is possible.
Positive change is possible.
I like that. So, no matter where you are in your life, you are changing, and not just for the worse.
Timing is half of everything.
Yes. We find two perspectives particularly helpful in making sense of the life cycle. The first, introduced by Eric and Joan Erickson, framed adult development as a series of key challenges that we all face as we grow older. The second is the theory by Bernice Newgarten about the social and cultural expectations around the timing of events in our lives. The Ericksons identified life stages based on cognitive, biological, social, and psychological challenges, and they frame these as crises. We either do or we don't meet a particular challenge successfully. And at every point in life, we encounter at least one and often more than one of these challenges. For example, in young adulthood, we are faced with the challenges of establishing intimacy or becoming isolated. During this period, we find ourselves asking, will I find someone to love or will I remain alone? In midlife, we are faced with the challenge of establishing a sense of
Generativity.
or feeling a sense of stagnation. Will I be creative and contribute to the development of the next generation, or will I be stuck in a self centered rut? These Ericksonian stages have been used by psychologists and therapists for decades to put life's hurdles into a useful context. Bernice Newgarten, another pioneer in the study of how adults change, has a different take. Rather than defining life completely by a development clock, Newgarten has argued that society and cultural shape development in important ways. Our upbringing and influences, that's friends, news, social media, movies, create an informal social clock or schedule of events that are supposed to occur at specific times in our lives. Social clocks differ from culture to culture and from generation to generation. Key events like leaving one's childhood home, entering into a committed long-term relationship, and having children each have their own cultural value and places in the timeline. And we experience these important events as either on time or off time, based on whether we think we're meeting society's expectations. Many who identify as themselves
LGBTQ plus experience themselves
as off time because some of the events used as markers reflect traditional heterosexual lifestyles. Newgarden said that she was herself off time in important ways. She married early and began her professional career late. In her theory, on time events help us feel that our lives are on track, and off time events create worry that we're not on track. We worry not because of off time events are inherently stressful, but because they don't fit others and our own expectations. Well, I think what they're saying so far in this section is that we as humans, because of culture, tend to time ourselves. You know, we expect our education to occur early, become professionals, have a family, then retire and start thinking about spiritual things. Well, here they're saying that timing is not always cut and dried. Newgarden, she did not do it in this time frame type. She got married early. And she became a professional later on in life. In other words, she finished her education after she got married, after she had kids, apparently. And she became a professional, but not as others had done it in their timing. She got married young, she had kids, then she got her education, became a professional, apparently a psychologist, and so her life timing is sort of off compared to other people. Others
Like I did.
who identify, let's say,
TQ.
LGBTQ plus, they experience themselves as off time because the events used as markers reflect traditional heterosexual lifestyles. That's not them. So their off time becomes different than other people. Now, these two ideas, life as a sequence of challenges and variation in the cultural importance of events and their timing, go a long way towards explaining how we feel about ourselves and how we engage in the world at different points in our lives. But there's another way to look at the winding road of life through the lens of our relationships, because human life is essentially social. When major changes deeply affect us, our relationships are usually a central element of what's in flux. When a teenager moves away from home, what is it that produces most of the powerful feelings involved? Living in a new place or making new friendships and being away from the parents? When two people marry, is it the ceremony, the event, or the bond that changes their lives? As we develop and change over time, it is our relationships that most often reflect back to us who we really are and how far we've come on our life path. A good life requires growth and change. This change is not automatic process that occurs as we age. What we experience, what we endure, and what we do all affect the trajectory of growth. Relationships are a central player in this growth process. Other people challenge and enrich us. So they're saying that other people who enter our life and become involved with our life, they challenge and enrich our own lives. With new relationships come new expectations, new troubles, new hills to climb, and often we're not ready. Very few people, for example, are ever perfectly ready to become a parent. But becoming a parent and being responsible for a tiny human being has a way of making most of us ready. It pushes us. Somehow we live up to what we have to do. Relationship by relationship, stage by stage, and in the process, we change, we grow. That's why we're not the same as we are when we're young. We have changed.
We have changed.
What follows is a short roadmap of these life changes or life stages as seen through the relationships that make them what they are. Compared to the vast literature available on the human life cycle, this is like a map drawn on a napkin. If you find it helpful, you can explore the references we put in the notes at the back of the book and take an even deeper dive. You might recognize yourself in some of your own challenges in what follows, and some of it might not apply at all. That's the case for everyone. But even if you don't recognize yourself at every stage, you might recognize people you know and love. A lifetime of adult relationships, a mini roadmap. Two different theories being put here on this timing. One is Eric and Joan Erickson, and the other one is Bernice Newgarden. Eric and Joan Erickson framed adult development as a series of key challenges that we all face as we grow older. The second is a theory given by Bernice Newgarden about the social and cultural expectations around the timing of the events in our lives. Eric and Joan Erickson feel that as we travel through life, we are expected to meet certain expectations, go to school, get an education, develop a relationship, get married, have children, have a professional career, retire, and then become spiritual. Bernice Newgarden, on the other hand, says that a lot of times culture and society can tweak that timing. There's on time or off time based on whether we think we're meeting society's expectations. And then she used the LGBTQ plus experience as an example that most of them feel like they're off time. They don't work in the same time frame that some other people do. Miss Newgarden says that's fine. Her timing experience was different than others, and other people experienced that off time events also. In her theory, on time events help us feel that our lives are on track, and off time events create worry that we're not on track. We worry not because of off time events are inherently stressful, but because they don't fit others and our own expectations. But they say relationships are a central player in growth, a mini roadmap. And they start off with adolescence. This is 12 to 19, and they've got it walking on the tightrope. Let's start with that infamous life stage, the teenage years. This is a time of rapid growth, but also of contradictions and confusion. An adolescent's life burns with intensity as they ascend into adulthood. If we have teenagers in our lives, their path from childhood to adult life, if we have teenagers in our lives, their path from childhood to adult life can seem precarious for them and for us. Richard Bromfield captured the feeling of loving a teenager well when he described the tightropes that they string for their parents and the people around them. A teenager needs us to hold but don't baby, admire but don't embarrass, guide but don't control, release but don't abandon. However unstable this stage might feel to the people around them, it feels even more precarious for teens themselves. They need to accomplish some big tasks as they move towards adulthood. Chief among them is figuring out their own identity. This involves experimenting with new kinds of relationships and changing existing relationships, sometimes dramatically. Through their encounters with others, teenagers develop new views of themselves, the world, and other people. From the inside, adolescents feel both exciting and scary. Possibilities abound, but so do anxieties as teenagers find themselves confronted with profound questions like, what kind of person am I becoming? Who do I want to be like, and who do I not want to be like? What should I do with my life? Am I proud of who I am and who I'm becoming? How much should I try to become like someone I respect? Will I be able to make my own way in the world, or will I always depend on the support of others? How do I know if my friends really like me, or can I count on them to have my back? I'm having intense sexual and romantic feelings, and they're blowing my mind. How can I manage this new intensity of intimacy and attraction?
At some point, in these teen years, parental figures
usually fall off their pedestals and become ordinary, sometimes boring adults. This creates a temporary vacuum in the role model department. Parental figures remain necessary for support. That's food, rides, money, but the real action is with friendship, if sometimes volatile, and can involve new levels of connection and intimacy. The question, who am I, is central, and teenagers often find themselves discovering who they are together, trying on new ways of being that include everything from styles of clothing to political beliefs to gender identity. For many people, close friends are never as central as they are when we're teenagers. From the outside, adolescence can look like a bundle of contradictions. To a middle aged parent, it may look like Invasion of the Body Snatchers. That once adorable and adoring child is now a moody teen who is at one moment childlike and clingy, and in the next moment a disdainful know it all. The clever title of Anthony Wolfe's popular parenting book sums up a parental perspective on this period. Get out of my life, but first, could you drive me and Cheryl to the mall?
yeah
Teenagers,
uh-huh
adolescents, they're in the process of changing from
childhood
to adulthood.
adult uh-huh
And that this is a very psychological,
in
trying time in their life. Basically said, with your own children, you felt that they were changing and that they needed you, but they did not need you. They wanted you, but they did not want you. This person, Richard Broomfield, says, hold, but don't baby. Admire, but don't embarrass. Guide, but don't control. Release, but don't abandon. Hold, but don't baby. That means you can be emotionally comforting, but don't treat them a very young baby. Still give them emotional support, but don't treat them like a baby. Say, oh, you're doing really well, but don't do it in front of other people to the point where adolescent or the teenager is feeling embarrassed, like, oh, mom or dad, don't embarrass me. Compliment them, but not overdo it. Let them start exploring
mm-hmm
them doing things on their own. Back here it says grandparents who watch this transition in their own children might have a different perspective. To them, this same teenager may represent the joyous future of the world, and the grandchild's shifting sense of self may seem like a necessary experimentation. All of these perspectives make sense, just as the scenario changes on a long road trip. When you look out at the world, what do you see depends on where you are in the life cycle. Taking another person's life perspective into account, taking it to heart, is a skill that we can learn. It requires some imagination and some effort, especially in the face of frustration. But it can help us spend less time complaining and criticizing and wishing that someone else was different and more time connecting and nurturing. This paragraph says all these things make sense if you look at trip on down the road. The scenery changes as you travel. The experience you go through changes as you travel. What you see changes as you travel. That is part of the life cycle of a person. So you can take another person's life perspective into account. You can learn from it, and if they have a skill, we can learn that skill. It requires imagination and effort, and which can be frustrating, but it helps us spend less time complaining and criticizing. We sometimes this book I think is saying we get a little too critical.
Copy.
If you are the parents, grandparents, mentor, teacher, coach, or role model of an adolescent, you might be asking, how can I best support them, even as they seem to want to be independent? What kind of things can we do to help them emerge from this period stronger and ready for adult life? And how can I survive their adolescence myself? How can I survive their teenage years? It gives you clues. First, don't be fooled by signals of teenage bravado and claims about being self sufficient. Teens need you. Some teens will show this by being clingy, but others may insist that they don't need anyone. Of course they do. In fact, a teen's relationship with adults may be more crucial than at any other time in life. Research tells us that there are advantages for adolescents who become more autonomous while still remaining connected to their parents. One participant in the student council study, that's the longitudinal research linked to Harvard study, conducted with graduates of 3 colleges in the Northeast, was able to look back as an adult and see the emotional puzzle of her teen years more clearly. After she'd become a mother of 4 herself, she reflected on the way her perspective of her mother had changed and told researchers. There is a standard joke of Mark Twain's about how much his father learned between the time the boy was 15 and 20. It's that way with me and my mother. But of course, the change was in me, not her. For a long time, I sort of clung. I was very anxious when my mother was around. Mainly, I guess, because I was afraid she was going to be living my life for me instead of letting me be myself. Now I sort of realize how perfectly marvelous she is. When this woman was a teenager, she was scared that her mother was going to always control her life, and that proved to be wrong. She was afraid that her mother was going to live her life instead of her. Now she sort of realizes how marvelous her mother was.
Perfect.
Presence matter. The adults an adolescent interacts with, as well as the cultural figures in today's saturated media environment, provide models for what life is, what it can be. So, the availability of in person, real time role models is extremely important. Life may be taking place increasingly online. More on that in Chapter 5. But physical presence still really matters. The template of how an adolescent imagines life is heavily influenced by peers, teachers, coaches, parents, the parents of friends, which is a unappreciated group of role models, and as in Wes Travers' case, older siblings. Adolescence life, role models, whether it's through social media or in real life, is important for adolescents. They see how these people are acting, how they are going through life, and they sometimes, unfortunately, they can emulate their role models, whether good or bad. Technical advances that are going on all the time it's changing our culture worldwide. It's not a local event that's going on, it's worldwide. The social media is influential media that is maybe teaching good things, but it also may be teaching bad things. I don't think this book is a method to adjust a person. I think this book is a study of how people interact with other people, especially forming relationships, and that these relationships have great influence on everyone around.
You can adjust yourself to teenager. If you not learn, you know nothing, and you cannot communicate with them very well.
Times change, methods of communication change. I think guidance, advice can change. You know, timing is half of everything. Timing of our learning experiences. We're learning on time and off time at the same time.
Tomorrow
We'll start with Wes's sibling steps up.
So thank you so much.
Well, thank you for joining us this morning.
Uh-huh.
And again, from the cold state of Mississippi. And we hope that everyone stays safe and sound during this time. Some things going on with the cold weather and with the fires out west in California. So stay safe, stay warm, or love each other.
Thank you so much. Have a great day in US and have a good night overseas in Thailand and somewhere else. We'll see you again tomorrow.
Good night overseas.
Bye bye.